actually, I don't know about you, but I find that quite challenging because it's quite difficult to remain awake for the whole thing, and so then you have there are these chunks of the teachings that you're awake for, and then to draw it all together without making mistakes because of the gaps. What was that about the King of Prayers? What happened there? I've got a feeling that I must have fallen asleep because I was just suddenly I just heard Rinpoche saying King of Prayers, and it's like, what? Can I just finish a sec, just a sec, because I just had this feeling that maybe, because you see, actually what happened was I heard King of Prayers, and then somebody sitting quite close to me told me the page number. And actually, the page number had been passed along the front from Roger. So I wondered if we were all asleep and got woken up by this King of Prayers. Oh, which page number is it? So what happened? What happened?
Well, that's what Roger does. He has his own summary of it, and so he says it in his own words, and then he says that's the abbreviation of the King of Prayers. And if you're not quite awake, you just hear King of Prayers, and you do. I've done it myself.
Oh, that's what happened. I see.
Once you know the trick.
Because when I heard him say about abbreviation, I was thinking, oh, so he wants to do us do the abbreviated one. What? Okay, I see. That's what happened. Yeah. I won't tell you what happened in Vajrapani one time. That was that was so funny. Were you there for that? It was really late one night. Sorry? Okay. It was really late one night during the teaching, and I was kind of like sitting up the front, kind of nodding. And so then Rinpoche said something. He was asking a question. I don't think it was specifically asking me, but he was asking a question. He was looking for somebody's name, and he was saying crocodile something, and I just piped up with Crocodile Dundee, like in front of everybody. Rinpoche was actually looking for the crocodile. What do they call him? The crocodile. It was the guy that had just got himself killed. The croc. Yeah. So I just Crocodile Dundee. Dangerous. So Rinpoche was talking about the goal of life being in the goal of the retreat, and the goal of life in general is enlightenment. And then knowing that, having that kind of 100% clarity helps you to cease creating the cause of suffering. Likewise, towards the beginning of yesterday evening, he was looking at the three principal aspects of the path from that point of view. That's the impression I got. That, with the three principal aspects, you cease to create the cause of suffering. When you don't have them, then it creates all sorts of problems, and you end up creating particularly you end up creating the cause for suffering and creating the obstacles for achieving liberation and enlightenment. So Rinpoche was looking for maybe an improvement on renunciation as a translation for ngejung, the Tibetan word ngejung. Now, and he mentioned that Tubden Chodron uses the term definite emergence, which looks like it's literal, but I'm not sure. Looks like it's literal. Actually, I think it originates from Alex Berzin. He's the one that started using the term definite emergence, I think, anyway. So the reason I'm not sure that's accurate is because according to Gengan Sangye, who visited our center, and a Medicine Buddha, earlier on in the year, the ngepa, the definite, indefinite goodness, actually refers to true cessation or liberation. I can't remember whether the emergence it means. Maybe it's not so much definite emergence as the definite emerging, the true cessation emerging. But still, how that's connected with what we understand as renunciation. Renunciation is like the common term, right? Everybody says renunciation, but there are a few alternatives. There is that one, which is supposed to be more literal, the definite emergence. I think Rinpoche mentioned that, that term is used by some people, but it didn't look like he particularly favoured it. But isn't that impressed by using the word renunciation, because what was it he said? Sounds like you're giving up. What was it? Losing something. Yeah. People do have trouble with it for sure, renunciation. If you think what you're doing is renouncing the causes of suffering, you're renouncing suffering and the cause of suffering, then it kind of works. And then there was another term that people were using, which was the determination to be free, which is fairly good. I don't particularly like it myself, but anyway, sort of got used to renunciation and kind of working through the initial reluctance to use it, because it does sound renunciation. We often talk renunciation, and it's like, I don't know. For some reason, people tend to think it sounds like giving up happiness, giving up everything nice, and leading a miserable life. Yeah.
I think for me, it feels like renunciation feels like walking away from darkness, and then the other phrase that someone else used that you didn't connect with feels like walking towards the light.
Yeah.
And that's why walking towards the light feels better.
Yeah.
Than walking away from darkness.
Oh, so you prefer the determination to be free?
I think that's, to me, towards the light.
Okay. The only trouble with saying it's the determination to be free is that sounds very much like the wish for liberation. And in the teachings, like in the three principal aspects of the path, they're certainly separate terms: the wish to be free and renunciation or definite emergence, or anyway, ngejung. So anyway, yeah, maybe we'll find a term that people find more separated, satisfying in future. But yeah. So anyway, at least from what you were saying, it's not like you have the idea that renunciation means walking away from happiness. It's walking away from the dark, and that's actually that's pretty good, really, because renunciation seems to be more like you've seen through psychic existence. So it's like you're backing away from it. You just you're not interested in it. The next thing is going to be you're going to look round and that's where I want to go, towards the light, kind of thing. So there's another thing that I have found a little bit helpful here, when you think that they talk about giving up this life, right? Giving up this life. And if you just add one small word there, that also, thanks, seems to work better, because giving up this life also, it's like giving up this life. It's, well, I think it's got several unfortunate connotations. Giving up this life, it would be difficult to work in the world if you've given up this life, kind of thing, wouldn't it? So if you think more in terms of giving up on this life, so you can keep going in the world with your job, with your family, with whatever, but you've given up on it in the sense that that's not what you're counting on for real happiness. You know that the real happiness is something else. So, renouncing this life, renouncing Well, anyway, as soon as you ask renouncing what, in actual fact, it's renouncing psychic existence, isn't it? So, it is. It's renouncing. You're renouncing suffering and the cause of suffering. So anyway, just bear that in mind. Maybe when you're using this term and you come across this term, renunciation. Renunciation means renouncing suffering and the cause of suffering. Yeah. I would say, okay, so this is the difference between renouncing psychic existence, renunciation, which is renunciation of psychic existence, and the wish for liberation, the mind, seeking liberation. Well, it's in terms of the object, I think you could put it this way: renunciation is the mind that's looking at samsara and seeing its defects and just is like finding it undesirable and completely, detestable and whatever, The mind seeking liberation sounds to me, anyway, just if you just think the way the words are put together there, it's a mind that's not looking at psychic existence, it's looking at liberation. The truth of cessation.
So your apprehended object is different? Is that what you're saying?
The apprehended object and the referent object, yeah, would be different. Yeah. I think it's like the difference, and it's a sort of, in some ways, it's a fine distinction, but the difference between not wanting to be ill and wanting to be healthy. So it's like you're thinking of the illness, you don't want it. You're thinking of health, and you want it, kind of thing. And then there was some comments on the Palansawi verses, which are obviously very important, but I didn't get that. Rinpoche was saying something about how he thought it would be better to do it this way, and it sounded like doing the visualization of purification and the receiving the blessings first, and then as you're going through the verse, the names come up, and then you get the replica dissolving into you. Was that what was going on?
Well, what I got was usually in that verse, you're supposed to recite the whole verse, and at the end, the first time you think this, the second time you think that.
The first repetition, purification,
right.
second.
And Rinpoche is saying that he thinks that if you hang on till the end of the verse, it's actually, you're not really doing much those first 3 lines.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's better, as you recite each name, to think, purified, the replica of the Lama comes, and you receive all the qualities. The next line, the next name, purified, replica comes. So don't wait till you get to the end, or it can be like empty recitation for 3 lines, and then you're supposed to suddenly do something at the end.
Okay, so then when you're doing the last 2 lines, you're not doing purification and receiving blessings and so on for all 3 of them.
Yeah, you're not really focusing so much on the last 2 lines.
Yeah.
I've never heard that from anyone, but Rinpoche sounds like he said, this is what I think, and it came from
But then
him.
what are you going to do with the last 2 lines?
Just remind yourself what you did.
Okay.
Well, Rinpoche didn't say that, but if you try and do it, then you'll find out.
Okay.
But I could be wrong, that's just what I heard.
Okay, we'll see how that works. Thank you. Then we had the quote from Je Rinpoche's text, which Rinpoche said was very similar to what he had been talking about the night before. I didn't get all the Tibetan, I didn't get all the English, but anyway, it was to do with if you don't know the secret, then things go drastically wrong. And then while explaining that, suddenly, well, obviously not suddenly, probably just there was a lapse of attention. Rinpoche began to talk about calm abiding and special insight, and then he talked a lot about that in the second part. Yeah, and I think that's what I'll talk about now. So, Yes, so there are, perhaps the way you could express what Rinpoche was explaining in this area last night was that calm abiding and special insight don't guarantee being able to achieve liberation, or maybe not quite like that. Maybe it's better to put it like this. There are different types of calm abiding, and there are different types of special insight, and not all of those are going to guarantee total liberation, the kind of liberation and the cessation of the delusions that we... wait a minute. Not all of them guarantee a total cessation of those delusions, even though they all are capable of abandoning the delusions, at least temporarily. There are some that can abandon them. Now let's start again. The main when we talk about there being different types of calm abiding and special insight, particularly, there's what we call like a worldly kind of special insight and a super mundane special insight. The super mundane special insight is one that can put a stop to all of the afflictive thoughts and the klesha, the delusions, whatever you call them, definitively. The worldly ones can't do that. So this was what he was explaining. So in one way then, that whole talk about calm abiding and special insight was a way of explaining to us, on the one hand, the importance of meditation on emptiness, and on the other hand, it was also giving us some kind of insight into the defects of cyclic existence, and specifically the form and formless realms. So, okay, so for the sake of people who have not learnt these things before, calm abiding, right? So calm abiding, shamatha, shine as they call it in Tibetan. This is a very, very powerful type of concentration. It's a concentration. Okay, so calm abiding. So the calm in calm abiding means like having calmed or pacified or eliminated the faults of concentration, which are laxity and excitement, and so all kinds of distraction. And then the abiding means abiding one-pointedly. So we're talking about being able to abide one-pointedly, remain one-pointedly on any kind of chosen object of meditation without being distracted and without having any of those kind of faults of laxity and excitation. Okay, so being able to remain as long as you want on whatever you want to meditate on, one-pointedly, with a mind which is very alert and awake. So there's there are all sorts of other things one could say about that. But anyway, generally speaking, achieving calm abiding is something you do by going through what they call nine stages of calm abiding, the 9 mental attentions, mainly relying upon the factors of mindfulness. And so Rinpoche for Shejin is using the term awareness. He was saying mindfulness, wasn't he? Or was he remembrance? Remembrance, okay. So where many people use the term mindfulness, Rinpoche is using the word remembrance. And where many people use the term perhaps vigilance or alertness. Like in the Bodhisattva Charita, there's a whole chapter devoted to that. So here Rinpoche is using the word awareness, shijin. So anyway, mindfulness is the mind. The mindfulness is a mental factor that remembers your object of meditation and doesn't allow the mind to forget it. And then shijin, the awareness, is the mental factor which is like a mental spy that's watching to see how the meditation is going, whether sinking and laxity, jinhua, and the excitation, mental excitation, gopa, are there or not. And then if they do arise, then it's sort of like the one that's responsible for using the antidotes. Is the one that's aware that the antidote needs to be practiced and relied upon in order to overcome the laxity and excitation. So when you're going through the 9 stages, the 9th stage is called the Deuxième Tsijibé Dingizin. So it's a concentration which is a one-pointed desire realm mind. So once you got to that stage, you're already able to stay as long as you want on your object of meditation without any kind of effort, without requiring any kind of effort. It's totally effortless. It's so then that means that there's a difference, that just being able to remain on your object of concentration for as long as you want without effort doesn't mean to say you've got calm abiding. That's another level up, and the way it comes is that once you've got to the 9th stage, then you keep meditating, and eventually you get pliancy. I don't know what term Rinpoche would use for that. Pliancy, the bliss of mental and physical pliancy. Sorry, rapturous ecstasy. Rapturous ecstasy of body and mind. Wow. So the interesting thing about that is that you see, when you hear that term, okay, rapturous ecstasy of body and mind, right? Wait a minute, what was it again? Rapturous ecstasy of just body and mind. Rapturous ecstasy. Okay, so anyway, you do have, ecstasy, okay. Rapturous ecstasy. You do have rapturous ecstasy of body and mind. I'm just wondering where the pliancy is there. Pliancy. Anyway, so yeah. Now, okay. So other translations they use the word bliss. Okay, so the bliss of pliancy instead of rapturous ecstasy, the bliss of pliancy. And then you have the there's the one which is sort of of the body. The one of the body means it's to do with the body consciousness, and then mind meaning mental consciousness. But here, so the thing is, anyway, it's a question that would, or like an idea that would you could easily get from when you use the term bliss. Okay, bliss of physical and mental pliancy. But perhaps also with this term rapturous ecstasy, is that would be some kind of consciousness. I mean, particularly when you say bliss of pliancy, bliss is really just it's a very nice word we have in English, which translates the Tibetan term dewa, which can also be translated alternatively as happiness or pleasure. So pleasure and happiness are types of sensation, right? sometimes they say feeling, they're types of feeling. So they're types of sensation. So therefore they would be a type of consciousness. If we're going to ask, well, are they form, something physical, or are they matter, or are they these, what they call the deminduji, or the non-associated? You'd think they would be consciousness, wouldn't you? So apparently they're not at all. They're not types of consciousness, which is, for me, was quite surprising. So this is something that came out in the teachings on calm abiding and special insight that we recently had at Land of Medicine Buddha with Gen Wongdu. And he said, he gave a very sound reason why it couldn't be a feeling or a sensation, like a blissful feeling, a blissful sensation, which is that this is a bit of a far out reason, but it's well documented, or maybe anyway, it's there in the scriptures. It's very clearly said in the scriptures that you can have. There are hell realm beings that have calm abiding, but they definitely don't have any pleasant feelings, because any kind of sensation in the hell realms is necessarily one of suffering. The suffering of suffering, pain, a painful feeling. So that's one reason why that kind of ecstatic, rapturous ecstasy is not a sensation. Just I thought I'd mention that, share that with you, since we just learned that quite recently. Maybe you need a cup of coffee. What is not what? The rapturous ecstasy is not a sensation. It's not a pleasant feeling.
And your point is that it's not a consciousness.
It's not any kind of consciousness. It's not a mental factor. It's not any kind of sensation. It's not any kind of consciousness. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure. It might actually be, it could even be a tangible object, it could be form. I'm not quite sure. Didn't get that far. It's just something to keep in mind. Then, okay, so once you've got the rapturous ecstasy of body and mind, then you've got the calm abiding. And so that first level of calm abiding that you've now achieved, and people are doing that these days, they are trying to get this, and it looks like they're succeeding. Then you've got your calm abiding, and that calm abiding, that initial level of calm abiding, is a form realm mind. It's not included in the desire realm. So you've got these three realms. We normally talk about the 6 realms, which really we should be calling something like the 6 classes of, or 6 kinds of sentient being. Okay, so of those 6, the first 5, the hell realms, preta, animal, human, and the asuras, not the suras, not the gods. Those are all desire realm. So then you've got the 6th one left, which is the gods, and there are 3 types of God. There's desire realm God, there's a form realm God, and there's the formless realm gods. And generally, so where the desire realm gods live is in the desire realm, somewhere around the top of Mount Meru. Then where the form realm gods, so they have a separate place where they live. I mean, following classical explanations, it's sort of like somewhere in the space above the desire realm. But anyway, wherever that is, where they live is called the form realm. And then the formless realm there's no definite place because there's no physical body there at all. So wherever that person is the formless realm. Well, no, I guess you wouldn't even really be able to say where they are, would you? I don't know. Anyway, they usually say that it's like it's unfixed. There's no particular place that you can point out as being the formless realm. Okay, so really these are three realms of existence that correspond with the kind of level of the mind of the being. So the people in the desire realm in general are kind of involved in, for the most part, wish for and survive on and nourish themselves on the five desire realm objects, the five objects of desire, the visible forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles. Okay. So the way that one moves from the desire realm to the form realm, and from the form realm up to the formless realm is the same. And this is something that not just Buddhists do, Buddhists can do, but also the non-Buddhists, like Hindus and so on, Hindu practitioners, they also do this, is by, they use this process which literally is referred to as like the seeing the grossness, because of the Shiraki Namachin, Shirak, seeing, thinking about the peacefulness of the, like for example, you've got a desire realm mind, you're in the desire realm, you want to develop a form realm mind. So you would be thinking about the qualities of the form realm and the defects of the desire realm. And through that process, you would gradually, in stages, abandon, not permanently, but you would abandon the desire realm delusions. And once you've abandoned them, then you would have a form realm mind. That's in general the process. And so there are four levels of the form realm, which Rinpoche referred to as the, so they're called the four samten. So those are often called the four concentrations. And this is a little bit, it's not very satisfying because you've got two words, samten, which is very often, translated as concentration, like we talk about the perfection of concentration. You've got the word samten there. And then when we talk about, like for example, if you think of the mental factors, the five object ascertaining mental factors, one of which is concentration, ding is in, it's a different word. So samten, like sam is like a thought or a mind, and then den is like something firm or stable. So Rinpoche has got firm contemplation, actually, and that's a very nice term actually. And because some of the terms Rinpoche uses, I find myself thinking, no, please, no, I can't use that term. But there were some very nice terms that came up yesterday. Firm contemplation. So you've got the four firm contemplations. And so then moving from, so that's how so there are those four firm contemplations. And so once in the way the process works is once you've abandoned the desire realm, then your next step, that means that you've moved into the first firm contemplation. And then the process by which you move from the first firm contemplation to the second is the same as the one for moving up from the desire realm to the form realm, particularly the first firm contemplation, and so on up to until you get to the last, and then you're going to move from the fourth firm contemplation to the formless realm. And so the formless realm, also you have four levels corresponding to four levels of concentration. And so there you have the limitless, was Rinpoche using the word limitless? Anyway, it doesn't make much difference, limitless or infinite consciousness. Then limitless space. Then limitless nothingness, then the tip of samsara. So now, before going more into, what Rinpoche was saying about how that happens, and in some ways, I mean, I'm just repeating what Rinpoche said, but I know that some people wouldn't be familiar with these ideas, and it might have been a bit confusing. So it is worth going through again, I think. So one thing here is that you can be in the desire realm, which means you were born in the desire realm. Like as a human being, that means you're a desire realm being. You were born in this world, and this is part of the desire realm. And so you're born in this world, and what sort of like your mind revolves around is these 5 desire realm objects that I mentioned. So, visible form and so on. Okay, now, if you create the karma through meditating on the concentrations, when you die, you can be born in one of the form realms or one of the formless realms. But even before that, you can cultivate a form realm concentration, an actual form realm concentration. And no, I didn't get that word actually. There was, I think he was calling it the actual body. So the actual form realm concentration. So it's like, now here's where you need to make a distinction, which we often don't hear in the Lamrim teachings, even though the Geshes and Lamas use the term Luten, which is like body basis. It usually doesn't get translated for some reason or another. Like they took anyway. So it's like your body basis would be a desire realm body because you've been born in the desire realm. So it's like you're a desire realm person, but your mind is not a desire realm mind anymore, because you've used this process of concentration. This technique of thinking of the qualities and the amazing qualities of the form realm and the defects of the desire realm, by just considering how desire realm is just so the life is so short, and the objects of enjoyment even are just so far inferior and so forth. So you've completely lost interest in the desire realm, and you're aspiring for the form realm. So through that, you see, it's a bit like, let's see. So, I mean, it's something that we have in our lives very often. You might have, let's say, in fact, this is a little bit the way dissatisfaction works. So you might have a car, right? You just bought yourself a car. Then you see another car which is bigger and better, and you sort of like compare the two, and it's like your one is smaller, this one is bigger, your one's slow, this one's fast, and so you keep thinking about that, and you lose interest in the car that you've got, and you're completely focused on this new one. So there's nothing kind of profound about that, is there? It's just, you've seen something better. So you just, you lose interest, and anything could happen to that car, the one that you've got, because it's just a piece of junk anyway, and you just want this new one, So you see what I mean? Because you've seen something better, you lose interest in the other things. So because of having worked through that process, so that you're completely intent on just the form realm experience, none of the desire realm objects hold your interest anymore. So the desire realm delusions don't visibly arise in your mind anymore. So you will have abandoned the visible arising of those desire realm delusions, simply because you're not interested in the desire realm objects anymore. It's a bit like, if you think about it, it's a bit like the explanation of how a person who's really understood the possibility of true cessation, a complete end to all suffering, how that person feels about the the so-called wonders of psychic existence. It's just that, it's just like, can't be bothered, just no interest anymore. There's something so much better. So it's like that. So your desire realm being, having been born in the desire realm, but you don't have a desire realm mind. You have a form realm mind. And so that's distinct from going through that process and thereby creating the throwing causes for being born in the form realm or formless realm. In this case, if we're talking about the form realm, so that's distinct from having actually created the causes for being born in the form realm by doing these meditations and then actually being born there. You die and you're born there. Then you're a form realm being, and you have your physical basis, as they call it. I can't think of another term that's kind of literal. Would be a form realm body. So then you'd have a form realm body and a form realm mind. Before that, as a human being in the desire realm, you can have a desire realm body, but a form realm mind, which is pretty far out to think about, isn't it? Because of course you wouldn't know to look at a person necessarily that that's what was going on, would you? Okay, so now the six analyses. So the six analyses, I can't remember the names of these six analyses one by one. They're often called the six attentions, and they're described as access meditations or access concentrations. What's that Tibetan term there? Nyardok. So anyway, some of my friends use that term, like ramp meditations, like the ramp going up onto the freeway. So this is like a ramp access meditation or concentration. It's sort of something that's taking you up to the actual concentration of whether it's the first firm contemplation, second, and so on up to the tip of samsara. What's going on in these six analyses? They kind of mark levels of how much of the if we stick to for simplicity, stick to the desire realm, moving on to the first firm contemplation. They mark the how much of the desire realm delusions you've abandoned through this process of seeing the defects of desire realm and the qualities, the amazing attributes of the first contemplation. So those anybody who's studied the grounds and paths, this idea of the great delusions, and then the middling great, small great, great middling, small middling, great small, middling small. I guess quite a few of you've at least heard that before. So all that means, let's see if I can explain this point. It's quite interesting actually, because I know that you sort of hear that idea that you've got these 9 levels of, let's say, attachment, or let's say anger. Okay, so the one which is the strongest is called the great, and then it goes down to the weakest one, which or the most subtle one, which is the small. So you kind of find yourself thinking, what does that mean? To have, what does that mean? Great attachment, middling attachment. What it means really is that, okay, we have our attachment at the moment, right? And it varies in its intensity, doesn't it? Sometimes when it arises, it's very strong, and it's like, just completely takes you over. Sometimes it's a little bit weaker, sort of a mild feeling of attachment towards an object. You kind of want it, but not, it's not really a big deal kind of thing. So what it really means is not so much that you've got, So we can talk about that attachment as being, there's the more sort of like full-blown form is great, then the middling kind of one is middling, then the weak one is the small one. And within that, you can also make distinctions. So within the great, you've got the more powerful one, which is called the great one. And then the one which is still great, but not as strong as that, is called the middling great. And then the weakest, within still being great, compared with the other, the other two, middling and small, but it's much weaker. So that's the small grade. But actually, sometimes you can say so it's the small grade or the great small. No, wait a minute. Small grade, yeah. So great, middling grade, small grade, and so on with the. Wait a minute, how was that? Great, middling grade, small grade. Yeah. So then, great, middling, small, middling, great, small, middling, small, small. And so it's not like you've got these 9 separate types of attachment, perhaps with different kinds of objects. It just really reflects the fact that when attachment arises, sometimes it arises very powerfully and sometimes it doesn't arise very powerfully. So a person who's abandoned the great attachment, what that means is that through the power of the antidote, whether it's, in this case we're talking about a mundane antidote. There's nothing super mundane about this. You're not using emptiness to overcome these delusions. You're just using this process of, this stuff's rubbish compared with this. So it's almost like, you're using attachment to fight attachment kind of thing. Attachment to something, more far out and better. What it means is that you still have your attachment, but it simply can't reach that intensity anymore. It can't reach the intensity the intensity where you could call it great, middling great, small great. You just can't get that attached anymore. You can't get that angry anymore. And then if you keep going with this process, eventually you also can't anymore get that middling level of attachment and anger and so on. So so then all of you got, the only possibility for you is to get a little bit angry and a little bit of attachment, which we would describe as the great small attachment, middling small attachment, small attachment, and eventually it's just only the small is possible, and then eventually not even that. You've got no interest in the desire objects at all, so you're not going to get any kind of attachment or anger, nothing, just completely untouched by it. You've still got your form realm attachment left, though. I think, and this also, people who are familiar with the grounds class, I think that, you'll know this, I think that when we talk about form realm, you don't have form realm anger, but there's form realm attachment and so on, other delusions, pride and wrong view and so on like that. So all of your delusions are now directed towards form realm objects, not towards the desire realm objects, because you're not interested in them anymore. So there, amongst these six analyses, 6 sort of access meditations. At certain point, you'll have abandoned some, and some of the delusions of desire realm, and then more, and at a certain point, I can't remember which one it was. There's a certain point where the desire realm delusions have now become so weak that you're wondering whether are they not arising because I don't have them anymore, or are they not arising just because there's some other kind of condition missing. So at that level, you're analyzing to see what's going on, and you discover that actually you do still have some desire realm afflictions left. So then you keep going with the process, and eventually you end up having abandoned all of them. Now we use the word abandon. Some of the monastic texts, and so some of the monasteries, they wouldn't say that through this process you abandon the delusions. They just won't use that term, because they say when you abandon the delusions, you've abandoned them for good, and you can only do that with the direct realization of emptiness. In Serra, and I don't know which other places, but in Serra, they have this idea: yes, you can abandon them, but you haven't abandoned them definitively. So you can abandon the visible arising of the desire realm objects without having abandoned them along with their seeds, which you can do with the direct realization of emptiness. So now, one of the points that Rinpoche was making last night is that you go through this process to get from desire realm to the first firm contemplation, from the first to the second, second to the third, third to the fourth, then onto the formless realm, infinite space, infinite sky. But in many texts you'll see infinite space, namkatai, namshitai, chiame, and tsitsi. So eventually you're using that same process to get from the infinite nothingness to the peak of the tip of samsara. Now you've got to the, whether it's in terms of having been born there, or whether it's in terms of being in the desire realm and having cultivated your concentration to that point. Now you have a peak of tip of samsara mind, a tip of samsara level of concentration. Okay, now that means you do still have your tip of samsara delusions. Now, perhaps somebody who hasn't got the Buddhist background and is maybe following a Hindu master, they might think that's liberation. There's no further. You can't go any further. But anyway, as from the Buddhist perspective, now you're you're still within psychic existence. You're now within you're now within this tip of samsara mind, and you have tip of samsara delusions towards the tip of samsara objects, whatever they might be. It's difficult to really imagine how they could have, what that would mean for somebody whose mind is so developed that, I mean, it's difficult even to imagine having karma abiding itself, isn't it? But this is like way beyond that. And like Rinpoche was mentioning that in the desire realm you've got all three kinds of suffering. In the form realm you don't have any suffering of suffering, and then in the formless realm you don't have any suffering of change. Actually, even on the fourth level, the fourth of the firm contemplations, you don't have any. You only have feelings in the sense of like sensations of equanimity, which means that when you get to the third firm contemplation, the part of the process of going on to the next level is that you decide that actually pleasure, like a sensation of pleasure, is like disrupting the peace of your mind, disrupting your concentration, and you don't want any more of that. So when you move on to the fourth of the firm contemplations, you don't have any. Of course, you don't have any unpleasant sensations anymore. You don't even have any pleasant sensations, which would be the suffering of change. You don't even have that. So I mean, it's kind of it's just difficult to imagine, isn't it? So to imagine what kind of delusions that means when you talk about the tip of samsara delusions, attachment and so on, it's difficult to imagine what it might be like. But anyway, they do still have these delusions, klesha, or afflictive thoughts and emotions. Now, the only way that using this process you would be able to abandon those would be if there was a realm within samsara higher than that, but there isn't. Therefore, using this mundane path, you can abandon all of the delusions of samsara except the delusions of the tip of samsara. So in other words, you can't abandon all of the delusions of samsara, not even temporarily. Because of course, you know, even the ones that you have abandoned, since you didn't use a super mundane path, you've only abandoned them temporarily. So here, abandoning them means actually temporarily suppressing them, temporarily preventing them from arising just because you're not interested in those objects anymore, because you're interested in something, you know, something else is really capturing your attention. So it's in that sense that you know, what Rinpoche was doing last night was explaining the defects of psychic. Explaining why you need the wisdom realizing emptiness, because without it, yes, you can abandon all of these delusions through cultivating calm, abiding, and special insight, but there's a limit. You definitely can't abandon any of the delusions for good, and with the remaining delusions, the delusions of the tip of samsara, you can't even abandon them temporarily. And that also shows the defects of samsara, because right up to the tip, since you still have some of the delusions left, and since you still have the pervasive suffering left, it's going to change eventually, and you're going to, you know, revert to the desire realm. And it seems that, you know, for the most part, what that means is the lower realms. So it's not something to seek out, even though the bodhisattvas do use these processes, and they seem to find some use in cultivating these concentrations, but not as means, you know, like what do you call it? Only as a means to an end, not as the end itself. Yeah. Yeah, good idea.
Does it mean that if you have, let's say, gotten to the small of anger, let's say.
Yeah.
So you have created the causes for rebirth, and the throwing cause into for rebirth into the formless realm, right?
Yeah, it seems to work something like that. Yes.
Does that mean that so the implication is that you don't have to get to small of all the delusions to get to the formless realm? Just any one will do. Is that correct? So you could have, in other words, you could get to the formless realm, be in, you know, small, let's say, of anger, but you could be in the great of attachment.
Oh no, it doesn't work like that. No. You when you abandon the great of attachment, at the same time you've abandoned the great of anger and so on, all of the other ones.
Ah, okay. So they're all.
And the way it works is, just think about it. You know, like if you really think that this table is, you know, just so wonderful, fantastic, you've got your attachment towards it, and you've got the anger towards the people who threaten to take it away or to damage it or something. So when you're not attached to it anymore, you know, anything could happen to it, and it's not going to bother you. So no delusion is going to arise with reference to that table anymore.
So all the delusions decrease in concert then?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes. Yeah, you don't have to work on them individually. You see, it's a little bit like when we talk about meditating on emptiness. Through the meditation on emptiness, all of the delusions gradually get weaker. So just like that, by using this process of seeing the defects of desire and the qualities of the first firm contemplation, you lose interest in the objects of the desire realm, and along with that goes a weakening of the delusions of the desire realm, to the point where when you've lost complete interest, then you don't have any of them arising anymore. That's how I understand that it works. Anyway, can we have a short break and then come back until